This is the Inside Podcast Network. This episode of Inside Central is brought to you by Savision, makers of live maps and vital signs for System Center. Vital Signs provides an advanced, always-on, real-time performance and troubleshooting view for Microsoft Hyper-V. For more information and to download Vital Signs for free, visit www.savision.com. Hello and welcome to Inside Central. I am Dan Krieger, your host. We are without Pete Zerger this week. Those of you who tuned in last week will know that he's taking this week off. His lovely wife rang up his boss and said, give Pete the week off because it's our anniversary. So that's exactly what he's done. So Pete is away, but I am joined this week by a more than suitable replacement for Pete. Some would say a better replacement for Pete. And that is Cameron Fuller. Hey, Cameron.
Hey Dan, how you doing, man?
Good,
I would definitely debate the better than Zerger thing, but I think he would too.
You're on the affirmative, I would imagine, that you are better than the Zerger.
I think I might even defer to Zerger on that one. I may give him
Wow.
the kudos on that.
Wow.
So.
It's a brave man that would go up against Pete, I guess.
Good.
But I have the great fortune of chatting to him most weeks, so... nevertheless, we will let him rest and take the week off, and we hope he's enjoying it. I have seen him pop online once or twice throughout the week, so hopefully he's not in too much trouble from his good wife. But we have you, and today we are going to be chatting about, and this, I guess, is off the back of a blog post you did back in November of last year, I believe it was, and that is skilling up in preparation for System Center 2012. And particularly today we're going to be talking about, or primarily today we're going to be talking about Operations Manager, which I guess is your key focus. So on that note, I guess looking at how we can skill up, moving our credentials, if you like, from Operations Manager 2007 to 2012. And I mean, let's be honest, the bulk of it is similar, but there are some differences and some new inclusions, I guess, like network monitoring. But let's start at the very basic level of skilling up. And I guess one of those ways is to build out a home lab. You know, installing an application and getting your hands dirty with it is one of the best ways to skill up. To talk to us about what you've been doing as far as building out your lab environment goes.
Awesome. Thanks, Dan. I mean, one of the first things I definitely saw was I worked with some of my colleagues, and the first thing we learned really quickly in this game is the fact that building out your own private cloud is the best way to really learn how System Center works. So what I actually did is I piggybacked off of some of my colleagues and the equipment that they started putting together, some specs they did, and started building from that. So what I actually did is I worked with my son, and for his computer science class, we actually identified what components he needed to purchase, how you build it, how you put them together, and all the rest of it. So we built his system, and we also built one of my first servers for the environment. So from a specs perspective, I like Newegg. That's just my personal preference. But we did Intel i7s, 24 gigs of RAM, with at least a couple of 1 terabyte drives on them, SATA type drives. Put those together in relatively simple boxes, nothing really all that highbrow, and installed them on Windows Server 2008 R2 SP1 Hyper-V. And started just with one of those, a single box, 24 gigs of RAM and enough drive space with an i7. It'll run, somewhere 4 to 6 different virtuals concurrently, depending on what you're running in it. So it's a good place to start from, at least.
Absolutely, and it's not going to break the bank. I mean, an i7, 24 gig of RAM. RAM's cheap. Motherboard, processor. The processor is going to be the most expensive piece in that scenario, but you'll certainly build something for. I mean, I don't know prices in the US, but less than $1,000, I would imagine.
Yeah, most of it is an average of less of $1,000. The difficult piece now is the drives.
Right.
The drives are a lot more expensive, so that makes it a little bit more. But what I actually found with the second one that I built to augment my first Hyper-V system is I picked up some IDE to SATA converters. They make them for about $20, so I was able to actually use some of my IDE drives that I had lying around, so I didn't have to buy additional drive storage for it. So.
That certainly helps. And I guess reusing drives that you've got at home is also a good place to start. I know, I personally went a little bit up from that. But having said that, I looked on eBay and I found myself a HP, was it a DL580, G1 or G2? Now it's AMD processors, but there's 4 of them with both dual core, so I've got 8 cores, and I had 96 gig of RAM. So I've gone a little over the top. But if I convert that to US dollars, it was $1,200.
Which is a really good deal when you look at it. I mean, you spent probably similar amount to what I did between the two systems that I built. I may have spent a little bit more. So I've got two systems that are i7s with 24 gigs of RAM.
Yep.
I actually got about 12 1 terabyte drives in total that I put in place for a lot of bulk storage.
Okay.
Gigabyte switch to be able to connect them together, which was pretty inexpensive. So I can transfer virtuals around even without having to use CSV and all that type of stuff, which would be cool to do that. I need to do that eventually, but
Yep.
it's pretty inexpensive, and it gives me the ability to run. I think last time I checked, I was over 20 virtuals in the 3 total different hosts that I've got in place right now.
Yeah, for a home lab, you're not going to need more than that capacity. Let's be honest. Well, having said that, maybe you do. But certainly for building out a system center lab environment, be that private cloud, you're not really going to need 20 virtual machines. How many would you say, at bare minimum, you would be running at any one time?
Good question. You got to start with at least a singular domain controller, preferably 2. So then on top of that, you're looking at one database server. You can do a singular database server for the entire lab and go with multiple instances so that you're splitting up the reporting engines, because the service manager component does require at least 2 different instances to be able to separate those. You need 2 boxes for service manager, a box for configuration manager, a box for orchestrator, and the list, you're watching as the list is going on, basically 1 per product almost. Right. So when you're all said and done, it's about a dozen different virtuals that'll be running at any one point in time. But if you got Hyper-V in place, you got dynamic memory in place, you can just pretty much add them all up and let them balance out RAM as they need to, so it's really not that bad.
Right. Yep.
Now, one thing I did learn the hard way, by the way, just as for anybody out there so that you don't make the same mistake I did, I decided to put my System Center Virtual Machine Manager database on my shared database server that I was running in Hyper-V controlled by SVVMM. 2 big problems with that. Number one, you can't move it, because as soon as I tried to move it in SCVMM, it freaked out. And number 2 is, even when you decide that you have, like I maxed out one of my boxes, I had an 8 gig of RAM box that I had that on, to be able to move that thing, I blogged on this later, but I actually had to shut everything down in the environment and manually move that system over and reactivate it and everything. So
ouch.
When they say that it's a good idea to put the SQL box outside of the virtuals that you're controlling with SCVMM for your SCVMM database, I'm way on agreement with that now.
Yep. I know a number of organizations that have virtualized everything. One in particular that I can think of where, VMM itself was virtualized, nothing wrong with that. The database that was virtualized can be problematic and cause you issues, as they found out. So it's, yes, we live in a virtual world, but there still needs to be some physical aspect to the infrastructure that you maintain, and to separate
Agreed.
out. It used to be that you did that for performance. You wouldn't get the performance that you would for SQL, for instance. But as we all know, disk I/O is the main hurdle with, or the predominant hurdle with SQL. And if you've got a decent SAN back end, then it's not such a problem to virtualize that. But in some circumstances, it's still beneficial to maintain some physical application servers.
Agreed completely. So the big thing that I've learned is working with all of this is you need to learn the entire stack now is the tough part of it. I mean, especially the way that Microsoft has shifted the licensing in the next round. All of the products are very dependent upon each other now. System Center Virtual Machine Managers integrating with Service Managers, integrating with Operations Managers. So it's become much more of you really can't just take one product and work with it. You really need to get a lot of the different products installed. You really need to get, almost the whole spectrum of the products installed to get the full benefit of it. So, and with things like the Cloud Process Pack that they brought out and stuff like that, they're beginning to pull together all those components.
Right. Would you recommend, excuse me, do you use the trial versions of the beta software, or is your recommendation to go out and grab a TechNet subscription or an MSDN? I mean, TechNet's the obvious one for $500 US. I think it's £400 and about $500-600 Aussie dollars. That's our predominant market for this podcast. You get all of those products and you can install them. There's no licensing issues or anything like that. So certainly from a home lab perspective, I'm assuming that would be your recommended approach to software.
It really varies depending upon a couple of things. If you're going to build this lab and you're going to keep it for a long time, you don't want to go with time-bound versions of it and the rest. But if, like I've got some of my colleagues who they just really want to learn a particular product, they want to go out, they want to pass certs on it and the rest of it, taking down the eval versions of it, trying them out, spinning them up, and accepting the fact that you're going to burn down those virtuals at a later point in time, it's not necessarily a bad thing.
True. I guess it also comes down to budget. I mean, we've already spoken about, multiple Core i7 PCs with terabytes worth of data, and we don't all have big budgets, though admittedly we're talking about, $1,000 to build out a lab. But if you're adding another $500-600 on top of that, it can be prohibitively expensive, or at least start to get that way. Look, you can always steal Works copies. I didn't just say that, did I?
And the other thing you could do, I haven't tried this yet, but there are some vendors that are actually doing like server rental type stuff that you can do. I think like Rackspace is doing one of them, so you can actually just build up your own, server environments out there temporarily. I haven't tried it yet, but I heard that that's one of the options that's available.
Okay. So that's a short-term rental, is it?
It sounds like, yeah. I don't have much details on it, but I did hear that is one option that's on the possibility list at least.
Okay. Nice.
So.
I guess the other one is Windows, depending which side of the pond you're on. Windows Azure. How do you guys like to say Azure? Azure. Again, if it's low compute, low space, you can just build out the VHDs and upload them. You can sort of expand and contract for testing purposes relatively quickly using Azure. Still can't say that.
At least it's not router versus router, or however y'all pronounce that.
Well, I say router, but over here they call it a router, which I don't know. Makes me giggle every time I hear it.
Yeah, it's got a phenomenally different context in America.
Yes, and Australia as well, to be honest. Promptly moving right along, you mentioned in an email, I don't even know why I'm bringing that up, in regards to a nifty little piece of software out by Jalasoft. And in fact, before we get to that, in regards to Skilling Up, I think I said at the top of the show that not a great deal has changed in Operations Manager 2012, between that and 2007. High level, what are the key differences between the two that people need to look for? And then we can sort of move into some of the techniques that will assist them in skilling up.
Well, there's really about 5 major areas that have changed associated with Operations Manager. So let me just kind of bullet hit through a good portion of these. The first is the addition of network monitoring. There was network monitoring capabilities in Operations Manager 2007 and 2007 R2, but it was pretty rudimentary.
Right.
Unless you speak SNMP, OID, and MIB, it's really kind of complicated to try to get those pieces in place. Just as a humorous note, by the way, I spent some time actually working and learning those terms, and I wrote a blog post on using the XSNMP management packs combined with XSNMP and data domain devices, and combining it together to form Voltron. So just a little side point there.
Love it.
But the network monitoring stuff is now integrated. It's much easier to use. You can go out and literally just give it, an IP address of a router, let it do, searches off of that one as a seed router in essence, or switch. And so you can go out and you can get these things integrated. There's like 800 plus different routers and switches and other network devices that come just able to be deep dive analyzed within Ops Manager by pretty much just providing an IP address, what way you're going to communicate with it, SNMP, V2 or V3, and what's the community string. So network monitoring is definitely one of the big areas. Second big one on the mark, in my opinion, is integrated dashboarding.
Right.
So Ops Manager 2007 R2, there were some dashboard options, but they were kind of bolt-ons. 2012 was built into the product. You actually define how you want to lay out all the different pieces of it. You put widgets in place and all this, and that's going to be another big hitter on it. A third major one associated with it is the .NET application performance monitoring. So being able to really take .NET applications apart and figure out what's going on with them. There's a fourth one which I'm drawing a blank on, and I'm gonna hit the fifth one briefly. The fifth one, Microsoft hasn't announced yet. We can't talk about it yet. It's what I've been referring to as Feature 5. So Feature 5, all they will let us say is, people have been asking for it. It is going to be included in the product. There's a really cool one that's out there, but they're not telling us what it is between now and then. So that's as vague as I could possibly make it without actually getting myself in trouble for breaking NDA. So,
Sure. I won't push you on it.
That is all appreciated. And then the fourth big one, the one that I bypassed because my brain didn't remember it there because it's a Friday afternoon, is architecture changes.
Right.
They kicked the root management server, RMS, they kicked that to the curb. They introduced the concept of pools, so you can pool together servers, management servers, to be able to provide things like network monitoring the rest. So those are kind of your top 4/top 5, what's new in Ops 2012.
Yep. Although more sort of 4.5, 4 and a tease, shall we say.
4 1/4, yeah.
Yeah.
I agree.
Yep. But nonetheless, I guess people will be eagerly anticipating that fifth one. Starting at the top at number 1, network monitoring. It is one of those things that I think is central to the longevity and the growth of Ops Manager as an enterprise class product. For those that don't know or haven't listened to previous podcasts where we have mentioned this, Microsoft licensed the EMC Smarts technology, which is part of Ionix, to sort of pull together that network layer and allow them exposure into that. And I've mentioned this on the podcast before. I was having a chat with an Ionix guy, and I showed him the capabilities and some of the dashboarding that you get from the network component in Operations Manager, and he just sort of sat there and went, "That's what we need. That's awesome." He was blown away by the data, not the data, but the representation of the data within Operations Manager. But all of that aside, looking at our lab, how can we do network monitoring? In a lab environment, we're going to have maybe a virtual switch. We're going to have perhaps a physical switch that's attached to our modem that's connected off to our ISP. I mean, we can monitor elements of those, but not much else. And this sort of brings me back to that little piece of software from JalaSoft. Do you want to talk to us a little bit about that and explain how we can build up our skills around network monitoring without having Cisco kit and all the rest of it?
Yeah, well said. It's one of those things that I didn't really have a good option for it, but I was reading, a colleague of mine pushed me a blog post from Kevin Holman, aka one, if not the best blogger on OpsMgr, definitely one of the top two out there right now, probably.
Undoubtedly.
Yeah, he's awesome and a good guy. But Kevin downloaded and started using the JalaSoft their emulator. So what it does is it actually emulates network devices. And I read through his blog post on it. It was really straightforward. So basically, here's what I did in my lab. I spun up a brand new virtual Server 2008 R2 SP1, gave it 5 different IP addresses, created DNS entries for 4 of them with different like switch, Cisco switch 1, 2, 3, 4, etc. Put those in place, loaded the emulator up, and then you can actually choose, like, I want to assign this IP address to this type of a Cisco device or this type of a PIX device. So I brought up 4 different network devices in the emulator, went to my OpsMgr box, did a network discovery off the 4 of those, and seriously, I'm not a network geek at all, but just by putting in the public, the key or the community string that I had defined associated with it and those IPs, they got monitored. They show up in Operations Manager, and I saw, as an example, memory statistics, memory utilization on my simulated devices.
Wow. Which
I was kind of thinking I'd get like a straight line or something, but it's got variation and everything. I was quite impressed, actually.
Nice.
So that's a great trick.
Yep.
The other thing somebody actually commented on Kevin's on that is, if you want to spend the money on it, go out to eBay or Craigslist or something and buy yourself some of the old Cisco gear, because it doesn't need to be anything new.
No,
You're
that's
really
right.
just testing the ability to communicate. So.
Yep. And let's be honest, it doesn't need to be physical. I mean, from an operations manager standpoint, the majority of people that are going to be using this are not the network guys. So they don't need to be able to configure the switches and do this and that and know Cisco inside and out. All they need is the community string, the IP of the device, and they start to collect the data. I mean, therefore, for me, it makes sense. It doesn't matter what data we're collecting. It doesn't matter whether it's valid or not. We just want to be able to see and experiment with the data that we're capturing. That to me, the JalaSoft solution is perfect for a home lab.
I agree wholeheartedly. Now, it is actually quite impressive. And to supplement what you're talking about is we really need to be able to see how we would represent these network devices and things like distributed applications. So
right.
This gives us the ability to do those types of things really well.
Yep. And I guess the other thing that it does give you is if you wanted to simulate a distributed environment, geographically dispersed, you can do that within a virtual lab. You can say that this IP address is actually sitting over in Atlanta and this IP address is sitting in Singapore, whatever you want. It gives you the flexibility to be able to toy around with the layout of the environment that you want to build.
Great one, by the way. I wanted to mention this is another one that I blogged on a while ago. I actually wanted to be able to set up a router, just a Windows-based router. So I used I think I did a Windows 7, and before that I did like a Windows XP.
Mm-hmm.
And you can actually set up like a low memory virtual router. I think at one point, and it was old versions of Windows, but I was running on like 12 megs of RAM. And so what you do is you spin this virtual up with the 2 different IPs, you route traffic through it, and then when you want to show the equivalent of a downlink, you just save or pause the virtual.
Okay. Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, it works. Yeah.
Exactly. Not optimal, but it works in a lab.
No, but that's the point. I mean, you don't need valid data. It doesn't need to be, spot on. You just want to be able to experience and experiment with the product and see what you can gain from it. And as you said, I think Kevin does a fantastic job on his blog of walking through, as he always does. Let's be honest. I don't do a CU update until I've I've seen that Kevin's posted that, yep, it's out, and here's my walkthrough. But it is a simple
By
tool.
the way, I have an
Go.
I have an inside track on the next CU update from Kevin. All right.
All right.
I know what the cat picture is going to look like. It's this cat. It's a brownish cat, kind of looking up at you with these pleading eyes of like, please. Because I sent an email to Kevin begging for something, and he told me he was going to steal that cat picture.
Nice.
Yeah.
I again, Pete and I have discussed this on the show before. We have no idea what that cat is about. I'm hoping to corner Kevin at MMS this year and just find out what the hell.
Please do.
Yeah. I kind of hope to. I want to get him on the podcast, to be honest. I'm hoping he'll be at MMS.
Send me an email if you want, by the way, because I run into Kevin pretty regularly. I can ask him for you.
Absolutely. There you go. Anything else?
One other really cool one I wanted to mention in the OpsMgr space, Avocode, the .NET integrated pieces, and how you can emulate those in a lab environment.
Oh, nice.
Cool stuff, because I just found this recently. Because remember, the Avocode pieces is .NET monitoring.
Yep.
And what I did in my lab is I installed the whole System Center 2012 product line, all the stuff that's available, publicly available, release candidate type stuff and everything, right?
Yep.
I installed the IS7 management pack, operating system management pack, gave it a day or two, and then I tried to do an ad of the .NET monitoring wizard, went through the list of what's available there. I got multiple hits on Orchestrator. I got the portal from System Center Virtual Machine Manager. I got the portal from Configuration Manager. The whole list of products, almost every single one of them had at least one .NET app that you could monitor with Operations Manager through the .NET code stuff.
Yep, fantastic. And it saves you having to emulate anything at all. It's already there.
Yep, and it's real data for you, because you can put in synthetic transactions. If something breaks in your lab, you get a notice on it.
Yep.
You know what your performance looked like. It's awesome.
Yeah. No, I totally agree. I mean, there's no point going out and recreating the wheel or digging around and installing additional pieces of software to emulate this when you've got it right there. And as you said, virtually every one of the System Center 2012 products has some form of web portal or console or something along those lines. DPM's about the only one that I can think of that wouldn't have a web portal.
Yeah, I didn't see any DPM web portal.
No, because Service Manager does have a self-service. Config Manager has web aspects to it. Anyway, we won't go through the list, but suffice it to say, there is your monitoring. There is your APM. Absolutely. Anything else on the Operations Manager front? What was point 3 in your list?
I think we were talking about dashboarding there.
There you
probably
go.
the
Yes,
dashboard
you were.
stuff.
Yep.
The widgets are pretty straightforward. Those are pretty easy to put together. A couple points of note that's kind of cool when you play with on these, that you can define a series of columns, or you can define a grid component. So I can, as an example, create a 2-column configuration, and then if I put a widget on the top left and I put a widget on the top right, I can put one on the bottom left and bottom right and kind of build downward with a column.
Sure.
Well, you can also nest a column in a grid. So I can have a column on the left and then create a column on the left with a column on the right, and then in the column on the right I can embed a grid. So I could have 9 different cells in the subside on it. You can actually build some really interesting stuff that way with it. So, but I recommend just trying it out. The cool thing is you can move widgets around and all this other stuff. So that's one that it works out of the box. You can just pretty much put them together and play with it and see what it does.
It kind of sounds like the old dashboard view in 2007, but a nested version of that. Is that?
It's similar with it, but it's almost like they took Silverlight and kind of put it into the console in essence. I mean, the web version of the console is Silverlight, but it's to the point where you can define a widget over here and a widget over here, and you can say switch these two, and it'll move them in real time while you're looking at it. So
okay, nice. Do we know whether we're going to be able to create custom widgets? Have we heard anything about that? This is purely...
Yeah. I have not heard of anything official, but I
Okay.
can extrapolate from at least one example that I saw. I worked with the guys at Civision, and they did a podcast that we did a while back, and they showed screenshots of integrated Civision live maps in widgets in Operations Manager 2012, which implies to me that it is possible to write your own widgets that would go into Ops Manager.
Yeah, so rather than it being a web page that they're pulling in or anything like that, it's managed code DLL that they've custom written, and then okay, that's nice.
I would expect that's what it is, but
Yep.
like I said, I only saw screenshots. I didn't see this is how it works. So
Right, right. So for still yet to be confirmed, I guess, or Microsoft is yet to make any announcements about that.
yeah, not yet.
No.
But I'm hopeful for MMS, man. Hopefully we'll hear a bunch of good stuff about 2012 at MMS. So
Oh, if I'm expecting that we will. Which actually brings me to the point, if you haven't already booked your tickets for MMS, time is running out. They do sell out pretty quickly. They sold out last year. So I think you should jump online, go to mms-2012.com, book your tickets. They're I won't say they're not expensive, but it's well worth it. If for no other reason than you've got the top people within the industry and within our community going to that event. So it's a great opportunity to meet them and just to talk shop. But if you don't manage to get to MMS this year, do not fear, good listeners. We will be there, and we will be broadcasting every day of MMS. That is Monday, probably through Friday. Not sure about the Friday at this stage, but we will be there. We will be broadcasting, and we will be giving you a wrap-up of every day and bringing in some great guests. Pete will be joining us. I'm hoping Cameron will be joining us. We'll be broadcasting live from MMS. There we go. Awesome. We'll be broadcasting live from MMS. The time is still to be decided. For my friends here in Europe, it will be your bedtime, I'm afraid. But virtually everywhere else in the world will be wide awake. That being said, it is still yet to be confirmed. But we will have a great lineup of guests sort of rotating through on each of the days. So look forward to bringing you some great content. Surely we've got to be able to get a little bit more out of Skilling Up. Can't we?
there's plenty more out of Skilling Up.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
There's lots of good stuff out there. I mean, really where we camped on the idea of download this and install it. I mean, that's
Right.
pretty much what we've talked about for today.
Yep.
But there's a lot of other options out there. There are a lot of good hands-on labs that are going out there.
Yep.
There's some links. You referenced my blog post on that earlier. We've also got on our blogs catapultsystems.com. One of my colleagues did a Skilling Up and Configuration Manager. So there's forums out there that are talking these things through. There's a lot of resources that are beginning to come together. And
Right.
I have to, of course, put in the shameless personal plug here. And some point in time, an announcement this week, on Amazon this week, the System Center 2012 Unleashed book is now officially listed for pre-order. So I'll put a slight plug there and go, yeah, I bet that one will be pretty darn good.
So that
would help also.
That's the Operations Manager Unleashed, is it?
Yep, that's an Operations Manager Unleashed. The Config Manager Unleashed is also being written. Orchestrator Unleashed, you name it. So pretty much the whole series is getting ready to go.
Okay, fantastic. I will pre-order my copy and bring it. Well, when do you know when it's due for release?
That I don't know yet. That one
Okay.
you'll have to have Carrie on and see if she can get her to commit to timeframes on that one. So. And the other thing that I got to list, even without Pete being here, I got to do this, is that if you're looking for training, check out the guys at Infront, because those guys seem to be ahead of the curve in terms of training on the System Center space.
Right.
So they're definitely another way to look at how do you skill up on this, because I think they're going to be ready pretty quick.
Absolutely, and that is actually a really good point. If you head on over to infront.com, I know that they do have content available, and are training people up as we speak on the myriad of products within System Center 2012, private cloud, etc. So definitely worth heading on over there and checking it out. Alternatively, another way of getting to the infront.com website is to go to mms2012.com without the hyphen. Thought that was
I didn't know they owned that one.
I thought that was a little cheeky, but loved it all the same. Yes. That being said, I'm going to throw this out there, and I'm going to ask the listeners. Ping me an email, dan@insidepodcastnetwork.tv. Let me know whether you would like for us to do a new series of podcasts around skilling up for System Center 2012 in the lead up to the release of the products, and I guess beyond that as well, looking at additional ways that you can skill up both technically and from a competence perspective, being exams and certifications and these sorts of things. I know, Cameron, you've done a couple of blog posts that I really enjoyed on consulting. I know you've been a consultant for quite many years now. You did a piece on dress code for consultants. I remember that. And whilst I had a little bit of a giggle as I read it, thinking surely this is self-evident that I think it's still valid and good content. So I'm going to put it out there, and I want to get some feedback from our listeners. Again, it's dan@insidepodcastnetwork.tv. I know that's a bit of a mouthful. Do you think it's worthwhile us doing a separate podcast, albeit short term, for the next sort of 2-3 months, on skilling up, both technically, as I said, and from a proficiency perspective and a life skills? I don't want to get all fluffy, but let me know what you think. dan@insidepodcastnetwork.tv. What are your thoughts, Cameron? Do you think it's a worthy topic to delve into?
I personally think so, because the reality of the situation is that these things are about ready to hit, and most of us either need to be ready before they hit, or we're going to have to be ready pretty much right after they hit. So right. I think it's a relevant topic, and when you got 8 products about to hit at the same time, it's a busy time.
Yep. And I guess when you add into that the fact that in Northern Hemisphere summer, Southern Hemisphere's winter of this year, there is an expected release of a new Windows operating system. Now, yeah. we call ourselves System Center guys. We have to know the operating system. We have to know the new virtualization technologies that Microsoft is introducing, or at least the new features to Hyper-V. We need to know group policy. We need to know all of this stuff. We don't need to necessarily know it in depth. Some of us do. I mean, some of us work in organizations where we're not only the ops manager guy, we're the Active Directory guy and the Exchange guy as well. So I think it's pertinent for us to sort of, as the technologies become available, are launched, and then moving forward to Windows 8, I think there's something there, but I want to hear from the dear audience and see what they say.
And I would also add one thing to what you're talking about there, Dan, and across the board, that for those of you who are learning and skilling up in these technologies and everything, if you find something that you found out that you haven't seen out there on the web somewhere else, I highly recommend put up a blog, put some stuff out there, and really share what you're finding out there, because really that's how these whole communities come together. Is you get a couple of people that are willing to share some of the things that they learn, and the next thing you know, I mean, take as an example Marnix Wolf. Marnix Wolf was a blogger for years, who had been working heavily in operations manager, and he really spent a lot of time sharing what he was learning on a day-by-day basis. And if you look how it's changed his career, it's done a lot for him. I mean, he's become an operations manager MVP. He's contributing on the upcoming Unleashed book and everything. And all of that really came from his decision that he needed to start giving back in terms of when he learned something. Now, me, I didn't blog for that reason. I blog for the reason because I have no long-term memory. So if I don't blog it, I can't remember it. So this way I could just go out and search for it.
Yep.
So.
Yeah, no, I probably fall into that second boat. I'm in the same boat as you there, Cameron. But look, I'll admit, if there's a few guys within the System Center community that I think anyone who deals with a System Center product is going to know their names. You know, within the operations manager space, it's your good self, it's Pete, it's Marnix, definitely. I mean, there isn't at least a week that goes by where I don't do a search and bang, it's his website. There's a few other guys as well that are prolific bloggers who are constantly sharing what it is that they find, and it is a fantastic way to give back. You know, if you find something where Google hasn't helped you, then absolutely, throw up a blog post, make sure it's titled and tagged and all the rest of it so that Google can pick that up so that schmucks like me, when I go looking for the information, can find it. And schmucks like Cameron. Well, I didn't just say
schmucks
that,
like me as well.
Well,
that's okay.
Schmucks like Zerga, perhaps. No, you're a good man, Cameron. Let's see. Is there? I think we've certainly covered off a lot of the operations manager stuff. I guess again, in particular, the differences between 07 and 2012. The one thing that we haven't discussed, though, this was the topic of a previous podcast. Maybe we'll just sort of brush over it really quickly now. Is the upgrade? Again, within a lab environment, it's very easy to start from scratch and just sort of build everything out. But in a real world scenario, and perhaps you work for an organization and you want your home lab to emulate the work environment to some extent, so that you can run through drills and run through upgrades and so forth. There are some mitigating circumstances to the upgrade. There are some considerations that need to be made. Minimum OS levels being 1. 2012 doesn't support 2003. There was rumor it was only going to be 2008 R2. Have they confirmed that?
I believe that's confirmed.
Okay, so
and SQL 2008 R2 also.
Yep. So there are definitely upgrade considerations that need to be taken into consideration. I sounded like Austin Powers then. Let myself introduce myself. What are your thoughts on the upgrade while I sort of go and bury my head in the sand? And actually, I'm going to try and dig up the episode that Pete and I discussed upgrading, just so that I can let our good listeners know.
That's cool. Well, there's basically three options available. You can do an in-place upgrade that is supported, that is allowed, but you already hit on the big pieces that need to be considered there. It's got to be Windows Server 2008 R2, it's got to be SQL 2008 R2. So what you tend to get into is you almost have to do a pre-upgrade before you'd actually do your upgrade to be able to get everything to where you would need it to be. You can't upgrade from an RMS. You actually would have to have a mitigation for that to be able to move it to a different management server. So that's option number one, is you can do an upgrade. The benefit to that is, in essence, you keep your historical data and you keep all of your customizations, all those overrides you put in place. Second option is you can do a parallel install. With a parallel install, you're bringing up a brand new Operations Manager 2012 environment. You are upgrading agents, and then you're multi-homing the agent so it's reporting to both 2007 R2 and 2012. Now, it's important to note it is only multi-home capable with a 2007 R2. So if you're, say, 2007 SP1, you can't do the multi-home approach, because I got a client I'm working with on that right now. So
that's almost a double upgrade.
In some ways, it is almost a double upgrade, but I think you're going to actually see a lot of people go this way. And the reason why is, while it's great in some ways to pull up all your overrides and changes, what you see in a lot of environments is, I've seen a couple of environments where they've had half a dozen operations manager administrators, and you get this difference of approach that occurs over time, and you get this hodgepodge of stuff that you've got in place. So oftentimes you may not go first option or second option, you may go third option, which I'll talk about. But the second option, in essence, allows you to be able to still monitor all your stuff that you're monitoring before, and then start piecemeal moving over individual applications in a cleaner 2012 environment.
Right. Yep.
And then, of course, you can do a fresh install and just basically say, I'm going to ignore everything that I had before, I'm going to install agents on it and call it done.
And
So that's the high level synopsis.
sure, there are pros and cons to each one of those. I would hazard a guess, and there's going to be more pros than cons in some, and more cons and pros in others. And I guess you need to weigh up what works best within your environment. If you don't have operations manager, or you've been trying it out, clearly fresh install, wipe what you've got, let's start from scratch. But retaining historical data, etc., then
And one other thing I forgot to mention in the upgrade path, some products are tied to specific management groups. So if you don't do the upgrade, you don't necessarily, you might have to relicense. And then
Right.
the second thing, and this is a big caveat to be aware of, is if you're monitoring .NET applications with Avocode currently, if you've got like Avocode running on Windows Server 2003, and if you do a fresh install of 2012, you cannot monitor .NET applications on a 2003 platform. The only way you can do that is to actually have a management group with the original Avocode installed that is monitoring those 2003, and then upgrade it, and then you can have what you had before as well as the 2008 platforms.
Right. I mean, Avocode will still run as a standalone product as well, if I'm not mistaken.
I'm not sure about that piece.
No.
I had heard that the only way you could get 2003 monitoring was in that capacity, but
Right. Okay.
maybe there's another way. That would be a great deep dive one. Is a
Yeah.
deep dive on Avocode. So
Absolutely. Yes. Totally agree. I managed to dig up that previous episode, and it goes all the way back to September of last year, Inside Central, episode 7, Upgrade and Migration Paths for Operations Manager 2012. That was Pete and myself. Go and have a listen if you are concerned, or if you need additional information. Though that being said, there is already a plethora of data out there in the blogosphere on upgrading and upgrade paths, so I would certainly recommend that you get along and either have a look at that, or head on over to System Center Central, and dig through the data that they have there as well. Was there anything else that you wanted to mention at all? When's the System Center Universe? Is that your...
Yeah, System Center Universe was January 19th, and that was that was my baby.
How did it go? So, was it good? Successful?
It went pretty darn well. I mean, if you look at, we did have some video streaming issues that we figured out as it got better throughout the day, but there were definitely some challenges with what we were doing there. But if you look at the statistics, we had close to 3,000 connections worldwide across different platforms. We simulcast to 15 different user communities. We were in 20 different countries on 6 different continents. So it's not bad.
That's not bad at all. So that was a virtual event, kind of a System Center launch event for user groups and well, the general public, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, the vision and the goal on it was we wanted to be able to try to synchronize all of the user group communities to kind of bring them all together for the first time into one event. And the other thing I was looking for is I wanted to have only the best of the best presenters in their particular areas. And other than our System Center Virtual Machine Manager presenter, we pulled that off. And I'll explain that in a minute. So we had Wally Mead on Configuration Manager, and Travis Wright on Service Manager, and Bailson Duque on Operations Manager. Had Pete Zerger came in and did Orchestrator for us. We had a great presenter on System Center Virtual Machine Manager, but he was snowed in Redmond, so I ended up having to take his spot and did what I could with it.
Okay.
And then we had, so that's why I was disrespecting one of them. And then we had Jason Buffington on DPM.
DPM.
So.
I was worried that this was going to go in a direction that perhaps we didn't want it to, and that you were going to start slagging somebody off. Use this as a forum for your personal vendettas, but no, you go right ahead. I'm if you're into sadomasochism, or no, what was it? Sadism, masochism? I don't know. Whatever it is.
I think you got it right. I think you got the term right. So
yeah, the self-abuse, I guess we'll call it. Let's swiftly move on.
We had a lot of fun with that. I mean, as a presenter, that was the most fun I've had in a while. I mean, we basically I was walking down the hallway and preparing for this presentation that I was going to do, and with the video challenges that we were having, I wanted to make sure that the audience could tell me if they couldn't see well enough what was going on online. So one of the things I did in my presentation is I started by taking Veeam had brought with these little round balls, basically, like for like stress balls or whatever.
Yep.
And I chucked out like 24 of those into the audience, and I offered up to anybody out there. I said, if I need to zoom in and you can't see, throw it at me in the middle of this presentation. So that was a lot of fun.
I can imagine it would have been. Did one immediately come flying back, or was it a while before?
I was pretty safe. I was quite impressed. I was waiting for somebody to start breaking loose.
Had I been there, never mind.
I would not have armed you if you had been there, guaranteed.
No. That's probably a wise move. Yeah.
But overall, last piece on Universe, I think it was a pretty darn successful. We were trying brand new territory. Happy with how it worked out, and there's already been questions about will there be a System Center Universe 2013, and that is,
not beyond
to
the
be
realms.
determined. So
yeah, was it recorded? Is it available for viewing at all?
Absolutely. It's on SystemCenterUniverse.com. All the PowerPoint presentations are out there. All the videos are out there. It's all fully available.
Fantastic. And that's free to the public?
Absolutely.
Well, there you go. Run on over to SystemCenterUniverse.com and get your fix. If listening to Cameron and I chat isn't enough for you, and you've got nothing better to do on a Friday night, or whenever you happen to be listening to this, then certainly run on over there. That being said, I think we've come to it feels like we've come to a natural conclusion, a natural end to this podcast. Is there anything else you wanted to get off your chest, or vent, or let our users know?
Nah, no venting. Just for those people that are going to be attending at MMS, look forward to seeing everybody there. Really excited to see what's going to happen this year.
Yeah.
And looking forward to seeing you as well, Dan.
Yeah, definitely. I would encourage people. We're not sure of the venue yet for our podcasts, but it might be nice to have a little bit of an audience and get some interaction with the people at MMS. So if you are going and you want to have a chat, sit in the audience, participate, whatever you feel, whatever floats your boat, then Dan at InsidePodcastNetwork.tv. Also, don't forget to let us know what you think of the Skilling Up series, whether you think it's worthwhile over the next few months to sort of branch off and have an additional podcast on that. Dan at InsidePodcastNetwork.tv. How do the good folks out in listener land get in contact with you, Cameron? I know those that may have been watching the video feed or are watching this after the fact will know that will have seen Cameron's Twitter hashtag come up in his lower third, which is at CFullerMVP. That's CFULLER MVP. Is that the best way to ping you a question or get in contact?
That's a good one. Another one is blogs.catapultsystems.com. I take feedback out there on a daily basis, so those are both good ways.
Fantastic. Okay, there we
go. Or
go.
System Center Central, I should have said as well. SystemCenterCentral.com, my blog out there also.
Yes, definitely. Now, we have mentioned a few blog posts in this and the fantastic Kevin Holman and his site. I will include links to all of these in the show notes that will be available sometime over the weekend. Today is the 24th of February. So look for those show notes at InsidePodcastNetwork.tv. But I think we're at an end. Cameron, I really appreciate you. I know it was a little last minute, but I appreciate you filling in for Pete. If only you could do this every week, then I wouldn't have to. No, that's not fair. That's not fair. I love talking to Pete.
I will have to join you and Pete more often. We need to work that out. I think that's a lot of fun. So.
Yeah, no, I look forward to it. But I really do appreciate you taking the time out on a Friday afternoon to sit and chat with me. So thank you once again, everyone. You can find Cameron on Twitter at CFullerMVP. Cameron, again, thank you very much.
Thank you, Dan.
This has been Inside Central. I have been Dan Kreger. That has been Cameron Fuller. Next week, Pete should be back, nice and relaxed, and his answer to my question of a busy week should be no. But thank you for listening. This has been Inside Central. We'll talk to you next week.